on this Wednesday night. A fresh new nuclear treaty, a new nuclear accord between Seoul and Washington goes into effect, replacing an over 40-year-old treaty. How will it change the way South Korea governs commercial nuclear activities for the next 20 years? 9-term lawmakers' last parliamentary attendance. It will be as former President Kim Il-sung's state funeral takes place at the National Assembly tomorrow. From politicians and business leaders to foreign dignitaries and the average Koreans, former President Kim is honored by many for the fourth day. And heightened tensions surrounding terrorists and parties of interest. Russian President Vladimir Putin calls Turkey's downing of a Russian warplane a stab in the back as Western powers vow unity to fight against terrorism. President Park will be in the bruised city of Paris for a global climate change summit next week. NewsCenter begins right now. Good evening to our viewers in Korea and hello to those around the world. I'm Moon Gun-young and this is NewsCenter. A new nuclear treaty between South Korea and the U.S. Came into effect as of about 4 hours ago, replacing the one that had been in place for the last 42 years. Arirang News Foreign Affairs correspondent Song Ji-sun has been covering the treaty all the way up to the signing moment between the representatives from the two countries, and she joins us now from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in downtown Seoul. Ji-sun, the new accord is the first in more than 4 decades. What more rights regarding commercial nuclear activity does this treaty guarantee South Korea?
Kanyang, it took them 4.5 years to outline this new treaty. There were no major breakthroughs, but Seoul definitely gave some room to expand its peaceful nuclear activities, including enriching uranium and reprocessing spent nuclear fuel. Let's take a closer look at the treaty. The chance of enriching uranium or reprocessing spent nuclear fuel is now open for Seoul, although when that can happen may be a bit too far to tell. South Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and U.S. Ambassador to Seoul, Mark Lippert, exchanged an MOU on Wednesday, putting the new nuclear cooperation pact into effect. It took both sides 4.5 years to outline the new treaty, as their differences were too big to resolve. With time running out, a separate deal had to be signed to extend the expiration date of the formal deal. The new deal approves Seoul's nuclear research, but will only allow development of nuclear fuel in the future through consultations with the U.S. Seoul wants to enrich uranium to produce nuclear fuel for its fast-growing nuclear energy industry, and also wants to reprocess spent fuel to reduce its mounting nuclear waste, but Washington is concerned over the possibility of proliferation in the Northeast Asia region. The two sides will set up a joint committee to follow up on the way Seoul can reach those goals in collaboration with the U.S.
And today, as a result of this new agreement, the United States and the Republic of Korea are world leaders in civil nuclear energy, and we have a long and productive history of nuclear cooperation compounded by a very bright future.
It was a very tough deal to agree upon but with continued efforts and trust, we came up with a system along with a very creative formula.
As the world's fourth largest nuclear energy producer, with 24 reactors generating a third of its electricity demand, South Korea hopes the deal could give this energy export engine a boost.
And for the enrichment, we wanted to have our own facilities to guarantee to the exporting country that we can provide the uranium fuels, but we could not get those right. But it is because we do not have the proper technology to get this right. So I think we have to develop the according technologies in the next 20 years.
Seoul believes the ability to create fuel would help it export more nuclear reactors. It is currently building 4 nuclear reactors in the United Arab Emirates that is worth nearly $20 billion. Back to you, Kanyang.
Thanks, Ji-sun, for that. Now, the commander of the U.S. Forces Korea has sided with South Korea when it comes to respecting sovereignty in regards to Japan's exercise of its collective self-defense. The need for a layered missile defense system in South Korea was also emphasized by the American commander. Here's our Connie Kim with the highlights of General Curtis Scaparotti's talks with members of the Association of the Republic of Korea Army.
The United States Forces Korea commander has, for the first time, expressed his views on respecting a country's sovereignty should Japan exercise its collective self-defense policy on the Korean peninsula. General Curtis Scaparotti said Wednesday the U.S., South Korea, and Japan recognize the sovereignty of other countries and international norms they operate with, and that he expects that to be the case for the three countries. Scaparotti was answering a question of the possibility of Japan exercising collective self-defense on the Korean peninsula. Japan's passing of its security legislation bill allowing Japan to fight in foreign territory alongside allies had raised concerns that Japan's military will enter the peninsula without the government's approval. Regards to the threat of North Korea, Scaparotti emphasized the need for a layered, inoperable ballistic missile defense on South Korean soil. Seoul is currently developing its own missile defense system, the Korea Air Missile Defense System that can intercept North Korea's missile at low altitudes. Scaparotti's comments are seen as the U.S.'s push to install the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD system in South Korea. THAAD is capable of intercepting North Korea's missile at high altitudes. The USFK commander assessed the U.S.-South Korea alliance as being at its strongest and said it will continue to deter North Korean threats. Around 28,500 American troops are stationed in South Korea. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
It's day 4 of the 5-day national mourning period for the late President Kim Young-sam, and the drizzling rain and cold temperatures have not held back thousands of people from paying their last respects. As our Park Ji-won reports, it's not just Koreans who feel a great sense of loss.
Tens of thousands of mourners continue to visit Seoul National University Hospital, paying their respects to the now deceased former leader Kim Young-sam. In the past 4 days, over 25,000 people have visited the hospital, and nearly 100,000 have paid their respects at various altars nationwide. Former President Chun Doo-hwan was one of those. He paid his respects on Wednesday. A pro-democracy activist, Kim was put under house arrest for about 2 years during Chun's grip on power in early 1980s. France's ambassador to Korea, Fabien Penon, also visited, leaving a note saying that a heroic fighter for democracy and a friend of France has been lost. National Assembly Speaker Chung Eui-hwa plans to pay his respects once he arrives back in Korea from Germany. In China, at an altar in the Korean embassy, China's Vice Foreign Minister Liu Jianmin paid his respects on behalf of the Chinese government. Over in Japan, former Prime Ministers Tomichi Murayama and Moihiro Hosokawa today visited the Korean embassy in Tokyo, offering their condolences and remembering the late president. Meanwhile, it is unclear that because of health concerns, if President Park Geun-hye will attend a state funeral that begins Thursday at the National Assembly. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
An iconic figure of the country's pro-democracy movement who served as president from 1993 to 1998. Late President Kim Young-sam's life was remembered and honored throughout the 5-day mourning period. His comrades, former foes, and fellow politicians all kept vigil at his wake, and tens of thousands of Koreans paid their last respects to the man at altars set up throughout the country. Former President Kim will finally be laid to rest at the National Cemetery in Seoul tomorrow. Our Shin Se-min has a sneak peek of how the procession will take place. Se-min.
Yes, the 5-day period of national mourning will come to a close when the state funeral for the late President Kim Young-sam gets underway at the National Assembly on Thursday. Now, looking at this rundown right here, the hearse carrying Kim's body will leave from Seoul National University Hospital to the ceremony hall set up in front of the National Assembly. At around 2 p.m. Korea time, the funeral ceremony will begin with a silent tribute, followed by a reading of Kim's achievements in life. Then a string of religious ceremonies will follow, starting with Protestant, then on to Christian, Catholic, and the Buddhist rites. The remembrance ceremony will end with floral tributes and incense burnings by Kim's family and diplomatic delegations. The funeral procession will then depart from the National Assembly at around 3 p.m. and will take a final trip around Kim's home in Sangdo-dong in Dongjakgu District and a memorial library before arriving at Seoul National Cemetery. Finally, the burial ceremony will begin at 4:20 and is expected to last about an hour.
The funeral proceedings will be similar to a grand funeral, or 국장 as it was called, that was given for the late President Kim Dae-jung in 2009. Kim Young-sam will be the first person given a state funeral under the State Funeral Act after it was revised in November last year. Attending the funeral will be some 10,000 people, including political affiliations and old enemies, under late Kim's will that stressed harmony and reconciliation in Korea. Kim Young-sam will be laid to rest alongside former presidents Lee Seung-man and Kim Dae-jung, Korea's first and the 15th presidents.
Less than a week after returning from a 10-day overseas tour, President Park Geun-hye will be launching another summit diplomacy starting Sunday. This time, the 7-day trip will take her to the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris and to the Czech Republic for a string of summits. For more details, we connect to our presidential office correspondent Hwang Sung-hee. Sung-hee, what more can you tell us about the president's upcoming trip?
Kanyang, first on President Park's itinerary is the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris. President Park, along with some 140 heads of states, will be received by French President François Hollande and UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. When she attends the opening of the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris on November 30th, President Park will underscore South Korea's efforts to fight climate change. This includes its ambitious goal to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 37%.
As a member of the Major Economies Forum that leads climate change talks, Korea will be a bridge between advanced and developing countries for the smooth launch of a new climate change agreement.
On her final day in Paris, President Park will speak at the UNESCO headquarters and meet with its secretary, Irina Volkova. Next stop, the Czech Republic. Here she'll meet the Czech president, hold meetings with the prime minister and lawmakers, and attend a business forum. The presidential office of Cheongwade said the visit is an opportunity to upgrade Korea's strategic partnership with the Czech Republic and strengthen bilateral cooperation. President Park will also attend her first meeting with the Visegrad, a regional economic community of the Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, all deemed the fastest-growing European Union nations.
There will be in-depth discussions on cooperation in future growth engines such as science, technology, and health and medical treatment, as well as opportunities for Korean companies to participate in state infrastructure projects in the 4 European nations.
The trip comes just 6 days after returning from a 10-day tour that took her to Turkey, the Philippines, and Malaysia. But the presidential office says that the Paris meeting is something that the president cannot miss, since the leaders will be adopting a historic agreement on climate change. As for her trip to Prague, it's expected to be an opportunity to pioneer a blue ocean in diplomacy. Kanyang?
Thank you, Sung-hee, for that. Now, we reported on the Korean president's call yesterday for a ban on wearing face masks during mass protests. Today, the ruling Saenuri Party and the government pushed for a law to prohibit street protesters wearing masks or any other facial coverings during rallies or demonstrations. The move, of course, follows a large rally that turned extremely violent 2 Saturdays ago. Our parliamentary correspondent Ji Myung-gil joins us from the National Assembly. Myung-gil, what details do you have for us?
Good evening, Kanyang. The ruling Saenuri Party submitted its anti-mask law on Wednesday to forbid demonstrators from covering their faces with masks. The ruling bloc wants to ban the use of facial coverings which could prevent identification, especially during illegal demonstrations. They have called for the opposition's support.
If the opposition bloc cooperates in revising this law, then we will be able to better protect people who are willing to undertake peaceful protests and guarantee more freedom of expression. We hope to pass the revised law within this regular session.
The ruling party lawmaker also pointed out that countries such as Germany, France, and the U.S. ban protesters from wearing masks during rallies. If they don't comply with the law enforcement, officers can demand they remove the mask or be fined. However, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has ridiculed the move.
The ruling party's proposal to revise the anti-mask law should not be used to stop protests, but rather be used to disclose authors who are hiding behind the government's mask to author state history textbooks.
The MPAD opposes the law, saying it infringes on individual freedoms and that penalizing demonstrators for wearing masks, even when there is no clear and present danger of violence, is an abuse of power. Civic groups also said the government's move was nonsense.
It's just nonsense. It's hard to define what a mask is. Scarves, mufflers, masks, hats, and sunglasses. They can all be used to prevent identification. It's just unconstitutional.
However, the ruling bloc and the government is urging the law to be actively reviewed in light of this month's violent rally, where some protesters hid behind their masks. Kon-young?
Seems like there will be a long debate over that issue in this country. Thank you, Myung-gil. That was our Kim Young-gil reporting for us from Seoul's National Assembly. The source of headache for economic policymakers in this country these days, or in recent weeks and months, has been and is slowing demand in China, which then spells out sluggish Korean exports to one of the world's largest economies. But there is bigger concern, says the chief of the nation's central bank. It's the rapid growth of competitiveness of Chinese firms in the global market. Our economics correspondent, Hwang Ji-hye.
The narrowing gap in competitive edge between Korean firms and those in China is likely to become a major challenge in the long term. That's what Korea's top central banker Lee Ju-yeol emphasized while attending a monthly meeting with local experts on Wednesday. Discussing future risks to the Korean economy, he said growing competition from Chinese companies should be a more pressing concern than slowing demand in China. In order to protect against such risks, the BOK chief advised local firms to pour their efforts into improving competitiveness through research and development. Citing the success seen in India, he also urged the government to work on improving the investment environment by stripping away red tape. He said India's rapid economic ascent came largely on the back of removing regulations that hamper foreign investment. Issues like a widely expected U.S. rate hike next month and the need for structural reforms in the face of Korea's aging population were also discussed at the meeting. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Korea's duty-free landscape is shifting, starting with a significant loss for Korea's retail giant Lotte, which is, of course, already struggling with a prolonged founder-family feud over succession rights. On the other hand, another Korean retail giant, Shinsegae and Doosan Group, which is a leading industrial conglomerate, came out of the battle gloating, winning licenses to open duty-free stores in the nation's capital. What does this mean, and how would it change the duty-free competition in this country? Well, joining me live in the studio to give us the details is our very own Kim Min-ji. Min-ji, first off, why such fierce competition to win over the rights to run duty-free stores here in Seoul?
Good evening, Kon-young. That's because the business has reaped in huge profits recently. In 2014, 6 duty-free stores in Seoul posted combined sales of nearly $4 billion. Now, it's been on an upward trend since 2007, and it's expected to top $8 billion this year. But a new law requires them to renew their licenses every 5 years. And while it will change the landscape, it's also raising concerns that it could deal a blow to the industry's competitiveness.
There are 2 new players on the field as retail giant Shinsegae and heavy industries conglomerate Doosan were lucky to grab golden tickets to open new duty-free stores in Seoul. Shinsegae, which plans to open its new store in April next year, aims to reap in sales of almost $1 billion in the first year. Doosan plans to turn Dongdaemun Market, a hub for the nation's fashion industry, into a major tourist destination, attracting some 13 million visitors to the area over the next 5 years. Until now, Lotte and Shilla have been the big names in the industry, but with the entry of the new players, the nation's duty-free landscape is expected to change.
70% of tourists come to Korea to shop. The duty-free market plays a part in deciding the country's competitiveness. We need more new players to boost the industry.
While their plans have been ambitious, some have doubts whether these plans will live up to the expectations. Duty-free shops require a lot of investment, such as state-of-the-art interior designs, as well as hosting luxury brands. But a new law requiring existing operators to renew their licenses every 5 years through an open competition means there's uncertainty whether they will maintain that license, not to mention having to deal with their employees and leftover merchandise if that were the case.
The new law prevents monopolization, and now companies will work harder so as to retain these licenses, but it could prove to be a hurdle for new operators to gain footing in the market.
Another sticky point is that some lawmakers have proposed a revision of a bill that will force duty-free store operators to pay 100 times the licensing commission they are paying now, which will inevitably lead to price hikes, making products less attractive to tourists.
The duty-free business is a core pillar of the tourism industry, so it's important to find ways to have duty-free stores help boost the industry as a whole.
Experts at Korea's duty-free stores are too focused on luxury brands, so there's a need to diversify on products like Korea's own unique designer brands in order to set itself from global competitors.
So Minji, how is this new process in Korea different from that in other countries?
Well, in China, licenses are renewed automatically every year, and as for Japan, they're automatically renewed every 6 years. And for Western countries, it's more or less similar to Korea, about 5 years.
So what you're saying is that this new regulation by the Korean government could actually be an obstacle for the expansion of this duty-free sector, which is often dubbed as a goose that lays golden eggs.
That's right.
But prospects for the Korean duty-free outlets are bright, you say?
Yes, and that's thanks to the number of tourists that have grown exponentially over the last few years. And Korea is on track to hitting the 20 million mark for Seoul in 2020, by 2020. But experts say the uphill trend is not something that's guaranteed long-term. So they suggest companies and local governments to work together to expand the duty-free business nationwide so as to attract tourists to other cities in the country as well.
Now, in this round of competition or race, beyond Seoul, Shinsegae retained another outlet in Korea's southern port city of Busan.
Yes,
but
right.
What you're saying is that more can be done so that these duty-free retailers could actually play a big role in attracting tourists to other parts of Korea.
Yes, you're correct.
All right. Great reporting. Thank you, Minji, for that.
Thank you.
Six years ago to this day, Korea became a member of the OECD's Development Assistance Committee, which means it became an official donor nation. It's such a feat that Korea marks this day as the official Development Assistance Day. Korea as a donor country, what does this mean and what kind of a role should this nation play going forward? South Korea from aid recipient to aid donor. Our news feature tonight, first with our Lee Soo-eun.
Here in Korea, November 25th is also known as Official Development Assistance Day, as it's a day when the country joined the OECD's Development Assistance Committee 6 years ago.
Korea's becoming member of DAC means that Korea now has to help other countries as not only moral obligation, but also mandatory obligation as a part of a national policy.
Korea's brief donation history began 2.5 decades ago with small volunteer dispatches and modest loans. But since then, Korea's contributions in development aid expanded in volume, amounting to a total of over $2 billion in 2013, a 60-fold jump. And there's still more that Korea has to offer.
It's not just about economic development or science and technology. Korea can share its learning on balanced development, like know-how in social development and experience in democratization.
President Park Geun-hye also vowed to expand Korea's assistance to developing countries in a speech to the UN Sustainable Development Summit last September.
개도국 발전을 위한 재정 지원을 꾸준히 확대하고 개발 협력의 질을 높이기 위해서 노력해 나가겠습니다.
With the president's ODA drive, the government aims to expand its assistance volume by 35% to 0.2% of its total gross national income by 2020. 이수은, Arirang News.
Korea's Development Assistance Committee membership marked the first time since the OECD was established in 1961 that a non-European country has joined the Advanced Nations Assistance Club after transitioning from an aid recipient to a donor. To have made this transformation in just a few decades speaks to this country's extraordinary economic rise and its commitment to focused and coordinated development. Korea, a textbook example of aid recipient turned donor. Part 2 of our news feature with Kwon So-ah.
Countries from all around the world reached out their helping hand to Korea when it was on the brink of collapsing from the aftermath of war and poverty. It was through the kindness and support of these countries that Korea could get back on its feet. Starting in the 1960s, Korea went forward with its economic development and stood in the global spotlight by hosting international events such as the 1988 Olympic Games and the 2002 World Cup. Since then, the nation's GDP per capita reached $28,000 and became an official member of the OECD's Development Assistance Committee. Korea's case is one of a kind in the world. Once an aid recipient country, Korea is now an active donor member in the international community.
There's a lot Korea is doing, and it has achieved the most noticeable economic development in the world in the shortest time. But besides the economy, the country is also a great model for balanced development in various aspects of society. I also think it's very meaningful how people can pass down their efforts in being participatory, strong in will, and self-reliant.
Korea provides aid and shares its know-hows in various parts of the world. The most representative is the Saemaul movement of the 1970s, which laid out the framework for the people to take matters into their own hands to escape from poverty. The program is currently adopted in many African and Asian countries, tailored to their respective situations. 60 years ago, Korea received health and medical aid and acquired skills from abroad. Now, it's Korea's medical staff and professionals that visit developing countries, deliver advanced medical healthcare systems, and offer treatments and surgeries for children in need and who cannot get those done in their own country. Also, in countries where it's difficult to set up special medical facilities and equipment, Korea is promoting its traditional medicine legacy, training more than 170 doctors abroad. Furthermore, Korea invites young people from emerging countries to Korea or dispatches talented Koreans to regions that need them to teach IT or construction technologies, and also puts efforts in enhancing the education environment for children in developing countries.
I've learned a lot of basketball and Korean. I like studying Korean. I'm learning the language very hard, hoping to attend university in Korea.
In this way, Korea is handing down its know-how for sustainable development, gained through its own experience of receiving aid, thus laying out the foundation to grow for those who are aiming at repeating Korea's success story. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Escalating tensions between Russia and Turkey after a warplane is shot down and a pilot is killed. Bruce Harrison joins me live in the studio. Now, Bruce, Vladimir Putin has warned of serious consequences to Turkey for shooting down one of its warplanes. Now, what is Moscow's next move?
Hello, Kanyang. The fallout from the crash has gotten messy very quickly. Russia views this incident as a military provocation. It could retaliate in a number of ways, possibly banning flights to and from Turkey in the short term, and maybe even pulling tourists out of Turkish resorts.
Now, it was today that Turkey went before other NATO member countries to, I suppose, to tell its side of the story. What happened there?
Turkey briefed other NATO allies, correct, and now NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has put his full support behind Turkey on this one. The plane went down along the Turkey-Syria border, and Stoltenberg stands by Turkey's claims that Russia violated Turkish airspace. He's calling for calm and dialogue between the two countries, much of the same from Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan. He says Turkey has no intention of escalating the situation further, but his country has to defend itself.
Nobody should expect us to remain silent when our border security is constantly breached. Our legal rights and our right of independence are undermined.
Russian President Vladimir Putin claims the plane was in Syria when it was shot down. Russian citizens reacted in Moscow by hurling eggs at the Turkish embassy.
This is the embassy of murderers, in my opinion, of the people who, instead of being honest and trusted partners, show their beastly grin.
This is one of the most serious clashes between a NATO member and Russia since the 1950s, and it only further complicates international efforts to battle Islamic State militants in Syria. Protesters flooded streets in Chicago after the release of a video showing an African-American teenager shot to death by a police officer. The officer was charged with the teen's murder Tuesday, and the graphic video went online several hours later under order by a court. Authorities had refused to release the video following the death of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald in October last year. He was carrying a knife while walking away from police when he was shot 16 times by Officer Jason Van Dyke. Van Dyke could face life in prison if convicted. Racial turmoil over lethal force by police has shaken the U.S. for more than a year now.
Bruce, that was a very disturbing pictures. We should have had a warning for our viewers for that. Chicago is only the latest city in the U.S. to erupt in protest over another young African-American man being shot by police.
That's correct. Tension has been really building since Michael Brown was shot to death in Ferguson, Missouri last year. In that case, the officer wasn't indicted. Now, this officer in Chicago has already been charged, so we'll have to wait and see how citizens react as his trial gets underway.
Right, and in the bigger picture, this seems like a recurring problem in the U.S., so we'll have to wait and see how America deals with this problem in the longer run. All right, Bruce, thank you so much for that. Well, Seoul apparently had the first snow of the season early this morning. For details, let's go over to our Jian. Jian, I'm not going to admit it because I missed it.
Well, Ganyang, the capital did have its first snow, but it was more like sleet and fell very early in the morning.
So it's safe to say that we did not get our first snow yet.
Sure.
Conditions were definitely colder today compared to yesterday. Right. What's in store for us tomorrow?
Well, it's going to feel like early January. The mercury in the capital will plunge to -2 degrees Celsius, and it will only climb up to 1. And this, along with strong gusts, it's going to make the air feel even colder. But no more snow is in the forecast for the capital area. But the rest of the country will continue to see a mix of rain and snow until tomorrow, while heavy snow warning remains in place for the mountainous regions in the Gangwon-do province, while a heavy snow advisory could be issued in some parts of the Jeollado provinces tomorrow night. On that note, let's move on to tomorrow's temperature readings. So daily low here in the capital will only start out at -2, 0 for Daejeon, 2 for Daegu, Busan and Jeju will start out at 4 and 6. And it's going to remain cold throughout the day, as daily high here in the capital will only peak at 1. 3 in Daejeon, 5 for Daegu, Busan and Jeju will only make it up to 8 and 6 respectively. Now this brief cold snap will hit its peak on Friday morning with a low of -6, and this freezing conditions is going to stick around till Saturday, so be sure to stay bundled up. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that is our broadcast on this Wednesday evening. I'm Moon Gun-young. Thanks everyone for watching, and we hope to see you right back here same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.